Well, hello, I'm Dr. Chris Lemmon, and this is my talk for what month is this? My gosh, it's now it's now in the midst of February, so this is probably the talk for March. I'm going to talk a little bit about a basic philosophy. Um, you know, people would always, when I was teaching and even just working, people would always ask me questions like, "What do you believe in?" Uh, and I used to always say, "I believe in you." Uh, and that's kind of a pat answer. I understand that. But what I was trying to avoid was that people, when they ask what you believe in, they're really saying that they want to assess and make sure you believe in the same thing they believe in. Otherwise, they don't want to have anything to do with you. It's club membership is predominant thing. We shouldn't be doing it anymore in theory, right? Read any book on evolution or evolutionary psychology or any one of the people out there that are chatting about it. And it's kind of like we're moving away from that restriction of absolute. I can remember I was working one time on a job and they brought a new guy in and he had been trained and he come over and he said, "You're not doing it right." I'm thinking, wow. Um, so how am I not doing it right? He said, "Well, I just got trained and they have me do it differently." Well, then you should do it however they train you to do it. Maybe they train me differently. I I don't know, but this is working for me. And so the next day I came to work and a boss come over and said, "This new guy was saying you're not doing it right." It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. I said, okay, maybe I'm not doing it right, but I'm doing it. I'm getting a job done. Am I slow? Should I quit? Should we end this relationship? That's fine. I don't mind doing it differently, but I'm doing it. I'm getting it done. What would be the difference? And he's looking at me and he says, actually, I don't know. You've been here on 6, 7 months and there's no problem. Yeah, I don't know. Never mind. Just go on back to work. So it was really intriguing. I just went back to doing what I was doing. And by the end of the day, this new guy came over and said, "Did the boss talk to you?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you're still doing it wrong." I go, "Oh my goodness." I said, there's a basic difference between us. You believe in number one, there's a correct way to do it. And that number two, somebody knows that correct way and has taught you. And number three, that there's a boss. And I don't believe any of those things. So So you want to go have a cup of coffee? We can do that. But if you want to sit there and criticize, well, then I'm sorry, I don't see where that's going to gain anything. Um, he worked a few weeks and then he actually disappeared. He quit. He just did whatever. He was probably upset with the world because the world probably doesn't work the way he thinks it should. Right now, today, we've got an awful lot of people out there that are very frustrated with the world because it's not working the way they think it should. Some of them think there is a correct way, and some of them have other people inflicting a rule that there's a correct way and they're doing wrongly. I don't want to get involved with either one of them. I do things a certain sort of way. People come up and say, "Why do you do it that way?" And I say, "I actually learned a different way. I played around with it. This is kind of the way I like to do it. It works out good for me. But if you want to do it differently, that's fine with me too, right?" It doesn't make any difference. You go way back in Aristotle's time. Aristotle was a philosopher, is kind of one of the founding, Plato, Aristotle, all those people are the kind of the founding fathers of our Western philosophy, whatever that means to you. It just means it's a way of looking at things. And and someone asked Aristotle, why do things fall back to earth? Why do things fall down? When you drop something, why does it fall down? And he had to think about it for a while. And the thing he came up with was that these things are made from earth, pots, clay, whatever, they're made from earth. So when you let go of them, they return to earth. That was his philosophy. That's the father of our Western philosophy. I'm sure that would create a huge amount of conspiracy theories today, but sadly, there would be a whole mess of them that would say Aristotle was right and gravity was wrong. Um, and yet science is still very frustrated with gravity. Uh, uh, yeah, so okay, we got bend in space time, blah, 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 blah. It's like, but all those things still the numbers don't quite work out. They've not been able to bring that all together. Um, we like to be able to say there's an absolute way. And when I'm trying to tell you, when we look at science, what do we know? We know a lot. There's a lot of data. No doubt about it. There's a lot of data. We look at our universe, we go, this is absolutely amazing. What do they know about our universe? They know an awful lot about 5% of our universe. The other 95% is dark matter or dark energy. And also we have a range called Planck's constant. So anything smaller than that or larger than this range means that we have no perception of it. So, wow, is that the absolute? The absolute is we're playing a game with a really narrow range, with a lot of restriction and not very much tolerance, no room for creativity, no room for adventure, no room for imagination. It's very sad. But I think you and I know people that live life like that. Very, very sad. I don't live life like that. So I have a philosophy that I normally don't talk about, but since the Stephen Hawking had passed, I was just looking at my notes. Stephen Hawking had passed, and he called it his top-down cosmology. He didn't actually write the material that he wrote. Was working on before he died because he had passed before he was done with it. But one of the people working with him on the team actually wrote a book up, and basically it's the way I started looking at when I got into the theory of chaos. When the difference between a deterministic and a non-deterministic form of chaos. And this theory has been around for a long time. It starts to explain a platform of thinking that a lot of religions got involved in historically, right? And that is that in a deterministic system of chaos, no matter what you do, it's going to come out okay. It's just choices. It might be rougher, it might be harder, might be, but it's just pathways, all to the same goal. So in a non-deterministic, it all just kind of, when things run into things, it's just all over for it. So it's like, wow. So to some degree, it looks somewhat the same, but it functions a little bit differently. What Stephen Hawking was thinking with his top-down cosmology, he's thinking that when you look at this whole universe and what we know about it, which is a lot of material, it appears to be that there's a drive to support life. Not necessarily human life, right? People die or whatever, but most certainly the whole cycle of life. There appears to be, and you look at a window of time where things had choices that could go different ways, and to support life, it had to go a certain sort of way. There's an influence. I believe in influence. If you want to call that a god or a space alien or whatever you want to call that, I don't care what label you put on it. I believe in an influence, and I believe that's kind of a phenomenon. We don't have a mathematical formula for it. So when I started playing with things in life, I started looking at how I can influence it and how it influences me. In the very, very beginning, I found a lot of things that influenced me in a very negative sort of way. It was a huge limitation. As I started moving past those influences and starting to open that up a little bit, I found like, oh, a lot more things were potentially possible. Things open up for me. I can remember one time, I know I tell stories, so I'm going to give you a story. And I may have given this story before. We old people repeat ourselves. My grandfather had a business, and he worked 6 days a week. And Sunday, he took off. Nothing was open on Sunday. So to go to the bank with the money from his business, he didn't have a day off to do it. So my grandmother would walk from our house to the bank, about a mile and a half, and deposit the money 1 day a week. That's what she would do. So finally, I was old enough to come along. And this was in Pennsylvania. So I went with her downtown. We got there to the bank a little early, wasn't quite open yet. We walked around the hub of the center of town to kind of get familiar. I wasn't allowed in the bank. Kids weren't allowed in a lot of places in those days, hospitals, banks, places like that, children weren't allowed in. So my grandmother told me to sit down on a bench and don't move. She was going to go deposit the money in the bank. There were a few people waiting outside for it to open. So I could see, even with my 5-year-old brain, it was going to take a little bit of time. So she went ahead and got into the bank. I, went for a walk, of course, around the circle. I just wanted to be, I didn't want to break her rule. It's just that I don't want to get in too much trouble because that way I could see her come out. I could hustle over to the bench I was supposed to be sitting on. I walked past a shop that sold tobacco products. Back in those days, there were independent stores that sold tobacco. You could get cigarettes out of vending machines, and some stores had cigarettes, but there weren't really grocery stores yet. And this shop specialized in tobacco. Uh, my mother smoked, but my grandmother didn't allow any smoking in the house. So my mother always had her cigarettes in the car. The first thing she would do is light a cigarette. My aunt, so many people smoked. It was just like unbelievable, but not in my grandmother's house. And as I walked past the shop, I'm looking in the window, and the way the sunlight was coming in, there was something sitting in the window, and it was putting reflection down. I don't know what the thing was, but there was this reflection, this shadow from this thing sitting there. And I go, wow, that's really cool. My imagination is going crazy. Wow, that's very interesting. I'm coming up on being 5. This is like July. My birthday was in August. And I'm thinking, wow, that's really neat. I like that shadow. It looked like, I don't know what it looked like. I can't tell you that it looked like something from a movie because TV wasn't around yet. I didn't see any movies. I just was inspired by the shadow it put out. And I'm looking at that store and I go, that's very interesting. I know we've stopped here. My mother's going in and got a pack of cigarettes already. She told me one time it's a penny cheaper in there. At the time, I think in the vending machine, cigarettes were 18 cents. Um, some places you could get them. I think this place had them as cheap as 16. So I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of interesting. So I'm headed back to the bench now, thinking I better be close to the bench when Grandma comes out. And and I sat down. As soon as I sat down, she came out and we're walking home. And I'm thinking, I can't say anything to Grandma because that would be a sin. My God, just to even go to the store unless you talk about it because tobacco was a big taboo, right? Like, wow. I don't know how I would explain it to my mother. So I have to imagine, somehow I have to imagine that thing in my world. I don't know how. So, uh, but it's about my time for my birthday. My mother's probably out shopping for me. I've got to take that idea of that thing, which I don't have a name for, and I could take that and put it right in her head, right? Come on, I'm 4.5, whatever. So I did. I just look at my mother every now and then, and I'd say, in my brain, I'd say, hey, think about this thing I saw, which I don't have a name for. On my birthday, I got it. I got it. It was it was for pipe tobacco. There was a round cylinder in the center where you put pipe tobacco, and it had a rack going out on both sides for pipes. And when you put it down, the light behind it throws out this shadow, like I don't know, it was like the walls of a fort or a castle, or I don't know because I don't know what those things were, but I liked it and I got it. And I could hear relatives saying, why did you get your 5-year-old son a pipe tobacco rack? It's like, and my mother says, I don't know. I thought he would just have fun with it. And you can put stuff in it in the center, and he likes to put things in containers. So that was her story. It's like, wow. Uh, I influenced that. Uh, and I don't know how many times in the future you would think, oh wow, I'd start influencing everything. I did influence several different things, the same intentionality, but most of the time I forgot. Most of the time I would try to get something and I failed, and then all of a sudden I realized I know how to do this, and I'm not doing it. I, it doesn't register somewhere. Now, that was my experience when I was 5. I spent the rest of my life trying to put that into context. How could I become a little more disciplined in influencing things my sort of way? How comes sometimes it really works really good, and sometimes it seems like there's a struggle going on because there is maybe like way too many people influencing it or going in different directions, or who is in charge, or maybe I'm misdirecting it, or maybe I don't know. I had a million questions and there was nobody I could ask. So I always thought in like, oh, maybe it's the stream of energy, because we were just then coming into, when I was in school, the idea of communicating through energy. Radio is communications, TV was coming in. It was new, and we could take a picture and send it to the TV waves, and that's pretty much an influence. And I thought, wow, that must have been what I've done. I must have somehow or another sent a picture, kind of like a TV does. That's where my brain was as a first grader or second grader. It's like, wow, this is really kind of bizarre. I didn't know. It was the foundation of my philosophy, thinking that I could influence things. So I then, when I got to college, I went into engineering because I thought, yeah, I can build things. This will be kind of fun. And then I did a little work study program in engineering, an intern piece for a couple of weeks, and I realized, no, what engineers were doing at the time, I most certainly didn't want to do. It was just a lot of busy work and a lot of testing and a lot of repetitive. And it's like, no, it's not what I want to do. And so I just switched. I looked at a different fields, and a lot of different fields. And I switched over to classes in psychology. And I figured that was probably the most intuitive element. In other words, I started associating the world of influence with the world of intuition. And a lot of people do, and that's not necessarily the textbook definition of intuition, but now all those words have a lot of meanings they didn't used to way back then. So, um, so I just started looking at influence. It's like, wow, we can influence things. So we can influence things. Then if I could find something positive in a person's world, why then I could go ahead and influence them and start to have them attend to that instead of the negative. That's pretty much the world of psychology, right? It's like, let's dig around, let's take a look at what those patterns are, what's going on in your head, how are you laying this out? Can we think about this in a different sort of way? Can we manage this? Can we get out of that habit of doing it and look at it differently? I like that. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Uh, I had different job opportunities, clients, different things that came up, but never substantial. So I wound up looking at how to apply it. Where would I want to go? I looked at working with children. That was very complicated at the time, getting all the licensing permits and everything. I would take some financing I didn't have. I then decided criminology would be interesting. I played into that field for a little while. And then I just started realizing, wow, I could be a teacher or a trainer. Well, educational system was going back to more schools. So I just got into the labor market, and I got into HR departments, and eventually I got into startup businesses. And I started training people. I started developing routes. I started developing business. And that's pretty much what I used it for. The philosophy was still there that I could have an influence. And it was just so difficult, even in training drivers. They would do things, and they would forget that they could influence things. They would struggle with things. Competition would kick them out, uh, and I wasn't having that problem uh, at all. It's just like I would build a territory and take it over and start to do distribution, and I would lock all those customers in, and I've had that for months, and then I would train someone and they take over. Some of them did fine and just went through their routine. Some of them would sort through and decide some customers weren't worth their time and they would drop them. And next thing you know, competition would get a start because now they had a way in. And it's like, and then I would get a call on, can you go back and fix this problem from the company I was working with? It's like, wow. So I was putting out fires and I finally decided I'd move to a different area where I could start all over again and get away from all the things that I did and had set up and were working great. And then people left them fall apart. Um, and that's, and I did that for quite a few years. And at some point in time, I just decided that, there was really no end to this. I could go in and set it up. I could build the volume. I could get all that going. I could have people making good money. And then I turn them loose and they shoot themselves in the foot. They just do, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They forget that they really need to be disciplined. They really need to attend. They need to be on top of it all the time. It's like, wow, people don't like that. So I decided, okay, heck with it. I stepped down into a smaller area, managed a smaller area, so it took less time. So I was working maybe 12 hours a day from 5 in the morning to around 5 at night. And then I started teaching classes. I thought instead of trying to make it work in the business world, I would take some of the experience that I developed and share them with people, right? And so I took ideas, experiments that grew up in the world of psychology, testing modes, different things. And I thought maybe if people sat down and did some of these, they would get an epiphany of how things worked. Maybe it is all about influence. Maybe it's not. I had no idea, right? And so we would just start to play with that. When people walk in the door, whatever they said, I didn't find them wrong. I look at two systems, not one, two, right? So we're back to Aristotle again. I'm saying that, yes, that world of science most certainly is what I call the logical world. It all is stripped into just certain protocols that are logically put together. And having said that, there are pieces that are questionably not quite fitting into the logical pieces. Today, someone gets a PhD in mathematics. They're pretty much working in mathematics that doesn't ever show up anywhere in our world. That when you have mathematical theories and imaginary numbers and things that are in different dimensions, it's like we're getting pretty woo-woo there, right? It's like, but they have mathematics to support it. So it's still science, right? It's a scientific theory. Yes, nice theory. We can get some prediction out of it. We can learn some things out of it. You can get some really crazy ideas. Superstring I like, but it's not mathematically working quite right yet. But I like. But also because of influence, I'm thinking that as we move forward, are we just discovering new stuff that we didn't know was there? Or are we influencing this creative element to make stuff that wasn't there? Are we building the platform that we house and exhibit? Are we on some level creating all that as an influence, supporting the movement and development of this program going forward? It's not an absolute, but it's the way that I start to look at it and start to think of it. So when people come back and they say, "Oh, I believe in prayer," and I say, "Great, I don't see a problem with that. I've seen groups pray for people. I was out of hospital one time when I was in law enforcement, and I had a person that was injured in a car wreck, and they didn't think that person was going to make it. And I walked out into the lobby, and there was 6 young people. The person was late teens, maybe 18, 19, an accident, and they were all in the same church, and they were praying. And when I walked in, they shut up because they thought maybe they were going to get in trouble for making noise. And I said, "You guys are praying for the guy?" And they said, "Yeah." I says, "Keep praying. Keep praying. and they prayed and he came through. Did that influence it? What do I know? But it certainly didn't hurt any. Does that make it a truth? Well, I don't know. I've seen people pray for other people that just died. So what can I say, right? I people come along and they say, "Can you give me a healing?" I'm teaching people how to maneuver energy and make things flow. In other words, I'm stirring up influences. So is that a concrete system? Is that scientific? No, absolutely not. It's all phenomenal, right? It's just like, yeah, whatever. It's like, but they get some results. They get results because all of a sudden it starts to be able to flow in a direction of getting out of that little narrow right or wrong. I'm going to die, or this is going to happen, or this is defended, or I can't do that. And it gets a little bigger. And when it gets a little bigger, more possibilities come into it. So that's what I believe in. Not an easy thing to just throw out there. And if I say that in classes and places, people would say, "Oh, the guy's a nut. He's just an idiot." It's like, well, okay, that's fine. I'm just looking at playing with something, start to have an influence on it, start to make it. I could tell stories, and I have told stories hundreds and hundreds of times over. The stories I anchor into, I learned back when I was very little. I had some crazy experience that my cousins and I were in the middle of, and something weird happened. And we were all seeing it. And then later on, a few months later, I'm talking to my cousins when I met up with them again. They lived in a different town, but we go visit. They didn't remember any of it. It was just totally gone. It was gone. And they look at me and they say, "No, that never happened. That never occurred." Yeah. I was in Philadelphia and my cousin and I decided to watch this gang fight. So we hid out in a tree and we were watching a gang fight because it seemed like a cool thing to do. I don't want to become part of a gang fight, but we heard rumor it would happen. It did happen. They were out there and they had these zip guns that they made, and they were all just like teenagers, like 17, 18, 19, the local schools. They were arguing more over what religion they came from, where ideology they came from, what we would term racism today, biases. And that's what they were fighting over, biases. They just, what part of town you come from, blah, blah, blah. And we're in this tree watching this. Kind of cool. Never saw it, but it got dark and I couldn't see very well. And my cousin got shot. It was a piece of buckshot from some little makeshift gun that they had. So we got down out of the tree and we went back to where he was living. Of course, he couldn't tell his family. So we were in the basement and I dug out that piece of buckshot into the back of his leg, one little BB. And I think we put like iodine or something on it and bandaged it up. And he was trying not to limp. And it was just under the skin. It was not a big thing. It left a scar. And I would tell him, "Remember that night?" He says, "No, that never happened. You imagined it. It never happened." I said, "Look at the scar on your leg." "No, no, that came from a horse. A horse kicked me." Like, wow, okay. That's kind of interesting. Um, so yeah, maybe I'm just totally crazy and I made it all up. Okay, no problem. I'll buy that. So I should write fiction, right? But I wasn't writing fiction. I was teaching classes. So it then became a philosophy, but not necessarily a philosophy I share it as like, think about it this way. I had more interest in saying, do this and see what happens. Try this and see what happens. As we're launching forward in this year, 2024, we've set up the blog so that we have created a brand new empty space over the last couple of years for you to be able to create a potential in. Empty, clear. Now we're going to start to attend to that. I want you to influence that. I want you to put your dreams and visions. Your knowledge will come later. We can fix it. In the very beginning, I want to fill it up with your dreams and visions. I don't want to fill it up with yesterday's stories. I don't want to fill it up with limitations. I want to fill it up with potential. What can you do with that? What can you flow into that? Right. So you really have to attend to it, because even when we have a dream, a lot of the elements of the dream, most of them, are from real events. We just reconfigure real events. We see people that are alive and people that are dead in our dreams, and we're all at some party at someone's house, and it's all this. Some are actual details and some are not. That's how imagination works. Imagination doesn't have that limitation of a logical piece. It's bigger. It's bigger. Phenomena is bigger. If we try to say, is phenomena right or wrong, we're not really saying that. When people say that is a phenomena, it's not a truth. There's no space aliens, for example. Well, what they're saying is that there's no logical support for space aliens. Okay, good. But I read sci-fi. I've got a bunch of sci-fi books. They're kind of cool. I haven't read them in a long time, but I have read them. And, a matter of fact, a lot of them I gave away to a young man who's now in college, and he was looking at reading material. And I thought, hey, he likes sci-fi. You can have those books. Um, those were just characters. Is it a fiction? I'm not looking for a truth. I'm looking for what influences. If all of a sudden you're unhealthy and you believe that some space alien is healing you, or some creature from another dimension is healing you and you get well. We've read that in the Bridge Between Two Worlds. We've read that in several books. I've read that. And it's like, is that totally crazy? It's totally not logical. It's a phenomenon, not logical. Don't bet on it, but play with it. Just play with it. So when you're telling your friends about this, they're not going to probably, well, some are going to believe you and think, you're the mystical, magical, something or another, the wizard, right? But then other people just think you're crazy. So you got to kind of be selective who you share that with. But as you take more and more ownership for being able to say, wow, I had some part of that influence. Maybe I hold those invisible creatures to me to do the healing. Maybe I asked for it. Maybe they came because of whatever story you want to put on it. I don't care, because you're just making it up. There is more room in making it up. Everybody that's got a successful business maybe knows some stuff, but pretty much to launch, to be right place, right time, is an influence. It's huge. I have been in business. I have been in sales. I have built routes. I have built divisions. And it's always been right place, right time. It's like, there we sit, right? I have people that went out of business, and I just walk over and said, you owe us money. You owe a lot of people money. I just want to get what you owe us. The rest of the people got to deal with that, however. And I collect the money. And it's like, I go back in my company and it says, oh, great, you got the money. We're good. And that's it. You see, how do you make those influences happen? That's what I think we're learning. How can we intensify that ability to influence that? Is there a magic formula? Do you do this or that? Do you hang a certain type of herb on a branch from a tree? Do you pray to the north? Do you blah, blah, blah? Like, no, pay attention. Figure out what helps you. Be present with it. I'm going to say your presence with it is what makes it happen. Your attention to it is what makes it happen. Boy, people just do not pay attention very long. But when we say the cycle of attention is about a minute and a half, but really that's just a struggle for a minute and a half to pay attention. They're really probably in 30 seconds gone. And they're just trying to shake their head and kind of come back to that attention. It's really, really tough. And it takes a lot of, and that's why we promoted meditation. If done right, you're attending to something. But really, for an awful lot of people, meditation is just a chance for them to dance in a fantasy world. They're just playing a video game somewhere. They're in their head. They're just out there blah, 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 doing whatever. And then they sit there and they tell me all stories. And I say, well, that's really cool. How'd that work out in your life? What came about? What manifested as a result of that? And they're kind of like, well, don't you understand? I'm in connection with the higher or whatever. And I'm going like, um, and what did that do for you? What are you getting out of it? What is it? Is it important that you have a club membership? That's just what we call join a club, join a church, join a. We people like to do that, but we're social. We like to connect, right? I mean, look at Facebook. It obviously a marketable commodity, right? So you get we like to connect, but is there more of a value? Can we as a group have more of an influence? Yeah, of course, because our attention now is held by the group dynamics. But there are other ways to be able to move forward in life, pursue potential for you, develop maybe your dreams and visions, but maybe not in the context that you imagine them. Maybe they're going to unfold in a different sort of way, right? And flow forward. I started life as a very unhealthy person, and here I am, 80 years old, and I was talking to a guy yesterday that's 83, and he was telling me that he had to go because it was his dancing night. He ballroom dances, and his wife is 93. And it's like, wow. Uh, and they ballroom dance. Did he move with real fluid movement? Well, he was a little stiff, but then at 80, I've got a few little stiff places too every now and then. So it's like, wow. So the fact that they have an amazing story. I was like, he's got a successful business he runs. Yes, he has people working for him. He's got a relationship that's working for him. He's got 6 kids out there that are all functional and doing things in the world. It's like, I think that's a pretty dynamic influence when you look at that. So, it's just like he's telling me stories. I'm sitting there keeping my mouth shut. I could tell him stories, but his stories are like, wow, that's his stories. That's how he influenced his life, how he got to where he's going. Wow, that's really fun to do. So, my philosophy in life is it's all about the influence. Pay attention. It's not going to come to you except in clues. It's never going to come out in a logical format. It's not going to be logical. If you try to put it into a logical place, you're trying to convert a phenomena to a logical piece and you lose all the creative elements. Then all you have is a reframing of yesterday's news. Nothing gained. Absolutely nothing gained. So you have to be able to put it into a different context. That is really, really, really difficult. So if you follow back on my blogs, I think I've got a couple of years up there on wizardscatch.com. You can look at how we staged and how we developed an empty space. And this year's goal is to pay attention, pay attention. We're going to really delve into attending huge amount, not for some little piece of dust. Those are logical things, but some little clue, some little piece where we can push on it and it starts to give. It's like the hidden wall in a fantasy, right? It's always the hidden elements. It's open a closet door and find a new world on the other side. It's always going to have more of a fantasy piece to it than a logical piece. Once you're over there and you're in the midst of it, you'll start to manufacture logical stories. That's what you'll do. And because that's how we operate. That's how we secure it. But the logical stories aren't all true. And, I get people all the time tell me blah, 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 and it's not all true. And I've had other people tell me, I've had 2 or 3 versions of the same event from different people, and they all have a different story. And they're all looking at me saying, well, your version is not true. And they all think they have a true version. And here we were all in a situation. I'm thinking about a riot I was part of, and we were all in this situation, and they all got a different story for what occurred. And it's like, wow. uh, I have to go back and look at my pictures to kind of refresh. And it's like, wow, that's really kind of interesting. Um, Even when I look at my pictures, it looks like what I said was probably pretty correct, but maybe there's some things I didn't have pictures of. I wasn't taking the pictures, someone else was, but the pictures pretty much mapped it out. Someone was snapping as fast as they could. So I have talked long enough. It's just, this is nothing for you to do this month. It's just like, I'm just setting up, well, where my thinking comes from, so that as we move forward, as this year, I'm saying, pay attention. I'll probably do more talks on attention, probably more stories, right? How things can unfold out of paying attention. Last year, I spent the whole year with the videos about teaching. That's how did I put classes and protocols together to teach people to pay attention, to do something, because when you do something, you pay attention, right? But Silva's mind control used to say, you touch your finger together like this, or some silliness like that. It's like those were little rituals to pay attention, right? Um, Maybe in a meditation, you relax and you breathe into your feet. Well, like, come on, oxygen's not flowing into your feet, so they're just moving energy, right? It's like all those things are little things to increase your attention. Some of them work for some people, some of them don't work for others. So that's why I do all these videos. Out of all these, one will work for you, maybe. Maybe they'll all work for you. Maybe none of them will work for you. That's the whole game of life, right? So thank you very much. Any questions, send your questions to Chris, that's CHRISS, at wizardscatch.com, WIZARDSCACHE.com. I'd be glad to answer your questions. If usually I get a lot of the same questions, so I'd be glad to maybe do a video. If your question is pretty independent, then unique in itself, I may answer you with an email. If it's intense enough or complex enough, I might have to give you a phone call. Or maybe I'll just ignore you. Who knows? Because I'm old. What can I say? I could just forget. Right. All right. Anyway, it's been fun talking, and want to thank you very much for listening for my long-winded speech on philosophy. All right.